The left is always inclined to look on the grim side of things. Always inclined to look on the grim side of things. The cup is always half empty. Until you point out, look, it's half full. It doesn't look so bad.
Welcome to Political Gingervitis, the crazy and zany podcast for progressives who need a laugh. I'm your hostess with the mostest, Andrew Stewart, and this week we're going to try to put a smile on your face and maybe a few thoughts in your head. Welcome again, folks, to Political Gingervitis. I'm your host, Andrew Stewart, and today I'm here again to bring you some laughs and get you thinking about a few different things that are going on throughout our day. Well, we are now in June. It is officially past the 100-day mark of Donald Trump, the game show host president's tenure, and it's very obvious that A, he can't get anything done. B, his base loves him while the rest of the Republican Party hates him. C, the Democrats and their idiotic leadership is doing everything humanly possible to deny that Hillary Clinton was an awful candidate and therefore are ginning up some crazy lunacy about Russian espionage. And then E, the progressive caucus of the Democratic Party is being stifled and stymied as a result and is barking mad at both Trump and the corporate Democrats who just are going to continue to ignore them. It's a pretty unfortunate situation. And so I wanted to talk briefly about tactics and strategy. Now, I know obviously there's going to be a lot of baggage that comes with this sort of thing, and I think perhaps that this discussion requires just an absolute consciousness of nuance. Here's the deal. A, is Vladimir Putin Mr. Snugglebunny? No. From what I gather, he's done some pretty shoddy things. Furthermore, RT, Sputnik, and the rest of Russian media as right-wing news outlets that sometimes give air to left-wingers from the American and European Union perspectives, they've actually been promoting some pretty nasty and virulent racism on their airwaves, particularly around the refugee crisis in the EU, which incidentally was caused by the war in Syria and Libya that America started. So there's that. Now, is Donald Trump actually a tool of the Russians? That's ridiculous. Donald Trump is just a tool. The idea that he could be the willing puppet of Vladimir Putin is just mind-boggling absurd. It gives him way too much credit. He's a dingbat. Now, is it likely that there's some sort of corrupt situation that exists between, say, Rex Tillerson and various fossil fuel interests within Russia? I wouldn't say it's necessarily hard to call that legitimate, but I also necessarily wouldn't call it illegal. I mean, the fact is, our government has been run by fossil fuel interests for well over 100 years now. The idea that all of a sudden we're going to give a rat's behind about the guy who, from Exxon Mobil just now we care? Come on, that's ridiculous. Is Donald Trump overseeing massive abuses of human rights by allowing countries like Saudi Arabia to carry on with their near genocidal war in Yemen, or just their brutal treatment towards anyone that happens to not be a straight heterosexual male that belongs to the House of Saud. Yeah, but so were all the other presidents since Roosevelt. So it's not like you're actually in a position to be talking Democrats. In fact, all these weapon sales that were going on that under Trump that people were up in such arms over a couple weeks ago and getting all hot and bothered over, those were started by Obama. So, I mean, like, he laid out the groundwork for those deals, and Trump's just finishing up on the end of those deals. So I don't really buy this false outrage that we see coming from the Democratic Party and the mainstream press. Now, what is necessarily, of course, important to point out is the fact that, yes, there is some nasty white supremacy and even some white nationalism of the neo Nazi variety running around rampant in some quarters. For example, I have personally seen that the alt right, which used to be called the neo Nazis, they are actively looking to recruit people via scummy websites like Breitbart or perhaps even some places like InfoWars or God knows what else Alex Jones' grubby face can be seen on. But we also should be mindful that that group is actually not as big of a worry as the real fascists amongst us. And what I'm talking about is the fact that the Fraternal Order of Police and the unions that represent Border Patrol and Immigration and Naturalization, INS, all those guys, they endorsed Trump for president and have been using this new presidency as an excuse to basically treat undocumented people like garbage, which exactly isn't a new thing considering Obama was a massive deporter also. I mean, it's so difficult because the fact is that, objectively speaking, everything Trump will do is all premised off a foundation that Obama constructed with extreme care and absolute disregard for anyone else's grumbles about human rights. This is kind of, in a strange way, the point where you find yourself not necessarily defending Trump as much as saying blame other people also. The Democrats got us into this mess, folks, so we're going to have to find our way out without their help. Because if you think that the Democratic Party is going to either A, become a Labor Party like it tried to be once upon a time in that brief span between, say, the end of World War II and the end of the Johnson administration, or B, that we're going to somehow mysteriously and magically transform it into a full on democratic socialist party. Guys, that's not going to happen. Like, it's simple. They are bought and sold by Wall Street, and they have been for 40 years. The problems that you guys are trying to grapple with now, they go back to Jimmy Carter. And so the idea that in one election cycle, we're supposed to change the Democratic Party, sorry guys, not happening. So the operative point is, for me anyway, to have a constructive and mature dialogue with third parties. And I'm willing to even count in here libertarians that have what's in their parlance called a bleeding heart libertarian bent, or even the Reform Party. We need to be thinking about things in terms of political physics. We need to have pressure outside and inside the Democratic Party so that the Progressive Caucus is saying, if you don't elect the people we want, we're going to go vote for that guy or girl that is going to do what we want. And if you think that the Democrats will actually respect you as a captive caucus without a third party to turn to, just look at how they treat gays and African Americans and Latinos. Captive caucuses get treated like garbage because the Democrats look at them, smile, and say, huh, you're not actually going to go and vote for a Republican. Screw you. We'll be as awful as we want. So we've got to come up with some independent politics outside of the Democratic Party to create pressure external to their stupidity. And we've also got to stop talking about Hillary Clinton being robbed of the election by anyone other than her own stupid self. I mean, good Lord, that was the worst presidential campaign I can even remember. And I lived through the Romney campaign. I remember Bob Dole's campaigns. This was a total fiasco. And, she had every opportunity to go and do any sort of work to build up a base that would support her. She could have appointed Bernie Sanders as vice president. She could have, I don't know, gone back to states after the primaries that she actually didn't go back to, like Michigan. Or she could have apologized for some of the more atrocious impacts caused by her husband's presidency. But no. And by the way, if you're like me and enjoy seeing hubris destroy megalomaniacs, I would highly recommend you read the last 40 pages of this new book, Shattered Inside the Hillary Clinton's Doomed Campaign by Amy Parnes and Jonathan Allen. It's quite frankly just one of the most delicious ways to see a power player's hubris collapse them because of nothing more than their own stupid ego. So, coming up tonight, we're going to be talking with historian Paul Street. So, stick around. So, Paul, you have been in the Midwest and have done a lot of scholarship on African American history and labor history. Yeah. And so, my first question is, with somebody with that background and understanding of that as a discourse, what has been your reaction now, having gone through the entire Obama era, which invoked at least the signs and the imagery of that discourse so to justify his ascent?
Justify what? I didn't hear that at the end.
Justify his political ascent.
No, I don't think it did. I feel that Obama always sort of basked in the glow of a progressivism associated with race, and also, I suppose, associated with the notion that he was a peace candidate. And there was this kind of sense when he was coming up of being labor-friendly and worker-friendly. I'm not sure where people got that from. It certainly wasn't his political career in Springfield and state senator, or really even particularly in Chicago. But anyway, I always sort of felt like he basked in the glow of struggles that were won in previous eras, the New Deal era, and the Civil Rights era. Eras of government expanding its capacity for and desire to help working people, to help people of color. Even though he was really a candidate of the neoliberal era, which was he was sort of riding on the victories, particularly the Civil Rights era, even though he was really himself a political agent creation of the neoliberal era, which is about tearing down government protections or rolling back government protections for laboring people, for working people, for people of color. And, it's just sort of felt that was kind of ironic, right? The way he got to ride a sort of wave of, legitimacy associated with Dr. Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement's victories in America in the 50s and the 60s. You know, and even Obama even had King's bust statue behind him this whole time in the presidency, but actually Obama was fairly consistently on the wrong side of each one of what Dr. King used to call the triple evils that are interrelated. First one was capitalism, economic injustice. King talked about poverty, economic injustice, but if you know King and you know his history, and King had a real history, a real connection both to labor and to the left and to the black struggle, really organic connection to all of those. You know, when he said economic injustice, he meant capitalism. He was, in fact, a democratic socialist. And Obama's pretty much lined up thoroughly on the wrong side of that one, with the Goldman Sachs's, with the Citigroups, with the J.P. Morgan Trust and the Bank of America. He quite famously protected them against popular anger, and then accelerated the bailout of them, and sort of the subsidization of this very unequal and Great Depression-like recovery that we've had under Obama. So I mean, anyway, he's been on that side of that and did very little, if anything, for working people, for poor people. The other great evil, part of the triple evils that were interrelated for King, was racism. Obama's had incredibly little to say about racism. King understood racism in a very deep kind of sense, in terms of how the institutions of the country are structured, how the labor market works, how the housing market works, how the criminal justice system works. All of those basic, King understood racism as much as about being much more than, whether your uncle is bigoted or whether white people are ready to vote for a certain type of black candidate for a political office, but really a deep understanding of social institutions. And that deeply understood kind of racism has continued pretty much unabated under Obama, with nary a peak, with almost nothing really from him about it. Obama's been extremely careful not to trigger white America in any really radical or aggressive kind of way. It's really beyond the simple fact of himself being black. He sort of stayed away from all of that, and in fact, he's kind of had a nasty little habit, which he had before he was president, which he's continued, of sort of poo-pooing structural and institutional obstacles to black advancement and black equality, and to giving black folks kind of, almost Ronald Reagan-like personal responsibility lectures on their own purported responsibility for being at the bottom of the steep socioeconomic pyramid of this country. So kind of really bad on that, except for a few things he said and perhaps done a marginal kind of way on criminal justice issues. And then militarism was King's other triple evil, and I'm not going to recount all of Obama's militarism. I mean, Bush had a much bigger body count in the Middle East than Obama did, but Obama geographically has spread the reach of the American empire in ways that Bush never could have ever dreamed of, and he's done it with drones, with his drone program, which Noam Chomsky has referred to as the greatest terrorist campaign in modern history, right? The drone warfare program, special forces, the militarization of Africa, the spread of American military installations to almost every corner of the world. And King would be outraged by all of that. So all that kind of progressive and left imagery that Obama came in with, sort of riding the crest of the wave of King in the last, he's betrayed all of them. As predicted, it's been.
Yes.
Pretty much as predicted. I mean, but I did a whole piece on Truthstick. I recently did a piece on Truthstick titled "You Were Warned," and went through all the pieces that I did, and more importantly, that other folks did, and not just leftists, but that sort of just reasonable mainstream journalists did, pointing out that Obama's pretty much a mainstream neoliberal kind of candidate. Was.
Right. So one thing that has been emerging after this election that got me thinking, I'm living just south of Massachusetts, and it seems of me, in my mind, that kind of an augury of what we've had just develop with the election of our first game show host president and the white nationalist current he's bringing in really seemed to be foreshadowed and played out in a miniature by the election of Scott Brown to Teddy Kennedy's old seat.
Yeah.
And that whole Tea Party movement, which presaged and was really what Trump tapped into with his candidacy. And the reason Scott Brown was able to flip Ted Kennedy's historic, the Lion of the Senate Democratic Party far left seat in that spectrum, that came out of the healthcare issue.
Oh, yeah.
And that takes a certain kind of talent, if you don't mind me saying, in terms of just being able to flip that kind of a historic seat to the Republicans overnight. And
well, you said with Obama, with Trump, you just referred to him as a game show host. I've been looking before you called me at the live coverage of this address or whatever, this show that Trump is putting on for his donors the night before his inauguration. And, he was so much a game show host in this venue as like a schmaltzy C- Borscht Belt comedian. It's just laughable. I've been watching him tonight, and it's ludicrous.
The gaudiness is jaw dropping.
Yeah, it's just stunning. I'm fairly convinced, and I did a piece on Counterpunch about this, that the Democrats would be retaining the executive branch and might even have one or both houses of Congress if they had simply, and I suspect they could have actually. I think this is within the realm of possibility. If they had simply passed anything remotely like social democratic health care reform, I don't know if they even had to do single payer, which Obama used to say very nice things about single payer and say he was for it until an open seat opened up in the U.S. Senate in Illinois in the 2004 campaign, and he realized quick, fast, and in a hurry that Canadians have single-payer health insurance was something he could no longer be associated with and expect to get the kinds of campaign contributions and endorsements and personnel assistance from the movers and shakers, so the deep state, the Wall Street and Washington lobbyists and players who really select viable presidential candidates. He realized he couldn't do that, and he dropped it. Even though 2/3 of the American population is long supported, basic universal government paid for national health care insurance. And instead, he ended up going with a measure. And actually, this was sort of the Clinton situation in 91, 92. They came in with huge promises of health care reform. And for a lot of Americans, they thought that meant, and for a lot of Americans, real health care reform actually meant single-payer health insurance. That's what they thought it was. And like Hillary, he came in, had a task force immediately. Hillary, like Bill, but Bill Clinton gave the task force to Hillary. They created a task force that completely kicked all the people who supported real health insurance reform to the curb. And Hillary proceeded with a ridiculously complicated and outrageous, arrogant scheme that she wouldn't relent on called managed competition. And it ended up blowing up in her face completely, and they just dropped it, and that was it for healthcare reform. Obama went with something a little more simple and a little more elegant that was first drawn out by the Heritage Foundation, which is a right-wing Republican think tank, and which was actually first implemented in many of its basic outlines by a right-wing Republican Wall Street minted governor named Mitt Romney, which has left the price and premium gouging power of the drug companies and the insurance companies fully intact, right? And the so-called Affordable Care Act. Well, that was pretty good meat for Trump during the election. In the last few weeks, they was talking about how high the premiums were and how unaffordable health care is for millions of people. So what you do when you do stuff like, it was a bill that only the big six insurance companies could actually love, along with the big Trump company. I mean, he really wanted to get into it. It was gross. It was even more gross than that because he played this very sick game, dangling a public option to at least have one of the healthcare options out there being sort of a fallback, kind of single-payer Medicare for poor people, improved Medicaid and Medicare for some people. And it turned out he was never serious about that being part of the policy debate. He'd already made a deal in advance with with a lot of the big hospital chains that he would only talk about that, and he never meant it. And so in the end, they passed this thing that people hate. The prices are still high. There's still all kinds of problems with quality and affordability of coverage. And when you do that kind of shit, you demobilize your base, the progressive base of people that voted you in. I don't think Trump or the Tea Party people so much as flipped working and white middle class voters. I think he just sort of those voters and also minority voters who would normally have voted for a Democrat out of pocketbook interests without any real red meat to sustain their commitment to the party, just tend to drift away. And the Democrats always struggle with turnout because they rely more on poor people and working class people's votes than the Republicans do. And if they don't give those people anything, those folks don't so much go over to the Republican Party. Some of them do. As they just sort of drop out and they don't see the point. And I really think that's what put Trump over. There wasn't some big, great wave of white working class voters that just charged out of racism and nativism and everything else ugly, for him as Hillary, with a lot of assistance from Obama. We could talk about Hillary too. Her campaign was absolutely horrific and vicious, actually. As I'm going to talk about in a counterpunch piece that I hope goes up tomorrow. They have nothing for those people, and there's this vacuum of popular resentment, and we only have a two-party system. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's insane. Everybody hates it. It's in violation of majority public opinion, which forever has said that two parties don't adequately capture the spectrum of opinion in this country, but it's like, oh, well, that's too bad. We only have two parties. So it's just this binary thing. You go back and forth and back and forth. We are in a neoliberal era where no president every president is going to do what American presidential politicians have always done. Promise the world to working people. The Democrats do it. The Republicans do it. They do it in different kinds of ways. They both do it. But since it's a neoliberal era, we have a globalized economy. Capital can go wherever it wants. The presidents really can't live up to their promises. So you just have this kind of game where the Republicans hold the White House for a while, disappoint and demobilize enough of their base for the Democrats to come in, and they reign for a while, and they disappoint and they demobilize their base, and you just sort of go back and forth. And meanwhile, both of the parties move further and further to the right, and now the Republican Party is damn near quasi-fascist and apocalyptic, and the Democratic Party is pretty much right of Richard Nixon on a lot of core.
They're Rockefeller Republicans.
Yeah, for policy issues. And I'm not even sure they're Rockefeller Republicans, because Rockefeller Republicans were situated in the New Deal era. And so they recognized legitimacy things like Social Security and Medicare and the Glass-Steagall Act and the regulation of Wall Street and the National Labor Relations Act and the existence of unions. I mean, really good Rockefeller Republicans did. And so, I sort of mean that, particularly on economic policy, that the Democrats are sort of right of Richard Nixon and Rockefeller now. And the populace in majority, in public opinion data forever, is sort of less center, even kind of social democratic. There was a candidate who kind of ran. I was critical of him on imperialism and from the left, but who ran, named Bernie Sanders, who sort of ran in accord with majority progressive opinion. And who I do think would have won the election if he had, in fact, been the Democratic presidential nominee, which, of course, the power brokers, I think, were never going to allow.
Yeah.
In which I don't think he made I don't think he got pissed off enough to make a charge for it until it was too late. I think he really did kind of come in as a just in about a kind of guy who was going to assist Hillary in terms of turnout and giving a little progressive energy to the Democratic campaign, and then hope he could advance his ideals a little bit. And then they did nasty things to him, and he got pissed off and realized, shit, maybe I could win this thing, and I think it's too late by then, you know. And so we have this absurd party system that's just completely out of line with actual public opinion. But on the other hand, public opinion, I love to cite all these public opinion polls that show that people are left of center. But the follow-up question is, okay, you think union organizing should be legalized? You think workers should get collective bargaining and access to unions? You think there should be single-payer national health insurance? Blah blah blah. You know, the next question is, are you willing to actually do anything about that? You know, or are you just going to sort of passive aggressively go into a voting booth once every 4 years and make a mark, and then go home and let other people run the world, and that's your definition of your citizen participation? So, you know, it's great to believe things, but you know, people are going to have to start to get a sense of politics being something more than the quadrennial extravaganzas. You know,
right. One thing I wanted to touch on that you've been touching on broadly is this notion that the Democrats essentially, time and time again, facilitate the rise of a reactionary, quasi-fascist in some instances, but certainly white supremacist element in the landscape for their successors. And I think one can go as far back to the period of Woodrow Wilson. It seems like a running theme with the Democrats almost.
Yeah, well, what it is they create this gigantic vacuum. You sort of got these two parties. They both manipulate populism on behalf of elitism. You know, they both pretend to they're sort of like the carnival barkers bringing the rubes into the big tent, right? You know, they're sort of like these hucksters, these shysters that bring everyone into this kind of process, this electoral process, under the guise of democracy and egalitarianism and all that kind of. They also both manipulate identity politics, so they sort of manipulate them now in different ways. So the Democrats wrap themselves sort of in the veneer of bi-coastal, sort of Hollywood and Upper West Side and Silicon Valley approved bi-coastal, liberal, tolerant, multiculturalism, and they talk about LGBT rights, and they talk about sort of a lot of the game about ethnic and racial diversity and gender diversity and all that kind of. The Republicans, their kind of identity politicized version of populism is more heartland, white nationalist, family values, evangelical, and all that kind of stuff. They sort of both play this game back and forth. They antagonize each other in both of those kinds of ways. The Democrats, among other things, do a sort of a lot of shaming of the Republican Party and its supposed white, lower middle class and working class base. And Obama says nasty things in '08, like, these people in these depressed, old blue-collar, deindustrialized towns, they get all bitter and they cling to guns and they cling to religion. And, it's just this incredibly condescending take on these people. You can't miss it, these Harvard law graduates like Obama or Yale law graduates like Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton's hilarious because she became all irate in '08 in the '08 campaign about Obama's comments about all these poor, pathetic, rural, white, working class people clinging to guns and religion. And she started this whole kind of being in North Carolina and Pennsylvania, calling him an elitist, and saying that they handed out stickers in North Carolina, the Hillary Clinton campaign, saying, "I'm not bitter." You know, they kind of reminded me of the Donald Trump people, you know, when Hillary Clinton called all Trump supporters deplorables. They handed out stickers saying, "I am an adorable deplorable." So anyway, Hillary gets all pissed off and accuses Obama of elitism. And then her whole campaign, her 2015-2016 campaign, you know, is sort of based on this kind of hatred and arrogant, identity politicized, bicoastal attitude towards Trump and his supporters. And she actually gets caught on tape. It was almost as bad as Mitt Romney's comments in 2012, where he said, you know, like 47% of the population are a bunch of lazy welfare cheats, or you know, something ridiculous like that. I mean, that was it from Romney. And what did she refer to Trump supporters as? Half of them are a basket of deplorables, you know, and you know, gay haters and Islamophobes and sexists and everything else like that. So they sort of they egg each other on race and on ethnicity, and sort of piss each other off that way, and aggravate their bases against each other. But it's all a game. It's all just a game. You know, whether you're a liberal in Manhattan who's all pissed off about creationism being taught in the schools, you know, or whether you're a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant in Kentucky being all pissed off about transgendered bathrooms or gay rights in San Francisco, you know, whatever side of the abortion issue you're on, and behind it all, Goldman Sachs always wins. JP Morgan Trust always wins. Citigroup always wins. You know, what Mike Lawson calls the deep state, Silicon Valley, military-industrial complex, Wall Street, always comes out ahead with everyone tearing at each other around race and ethnicity. Which Machiavelli just talking about divide and rule. We have divide and rule today.
Certainly. And
I think Trump understood that. I think he knows what he's doing in that regard. Hillary thought she could. I mean, it's so funny to see the Hillary people marching, the people disappointed about Trump winning, marching, chanting, "Love Trump's hate." Love Trump. I can't tell how many times I've heard that. I've seen bumper stickers everywhere. Love Trump's hate. She ran a campaign of hate against the basket of deplorables. You know, and you know, what did David Plouffe, Obama's campaign manager, say in early last year? He said it's not exactly hope and change. It's a campaign of hate and castrate. And that's well, I mean, hate Trump's hate in the 2016 election. One kind of hate, the kind of heartland white nationalist, you know, Republican version of hate, defeated the elitist identity, politicized multicultural version of hate represented by Hillary Clinton.
certainly. And
meanwhile, behind all of it is the real hate that matters, which is that of the not the 1%, but the 0.1% for all the rest of it. And they know what they're doing. You know, they know what's going on. They know very well.
so, Paul, I'd like if you could just describe how you saw and reacted to Obama as he began to make his way through Illinois politics, and how you articulated that in your writings and your books and things of that nature.
Well, in Illinois politics, you know, I was when I didn't pay all that much attention to Obama, except that was a point in my life where Obama was sort of a practical fact of my life. Because I was wrapped up in all this policy research, and I was working for liberals and making a paycheck. How I was able to pay for my health insurance and send my kid to college was that I worked first at the Office for Social Policy Research at Northern Illinois University, and then I got sort of promoted to this job at Child Urban League, where I was a research director. I even was called vice president at some point. So Obama was a guy that you sort of had to deal with, and to whom you would send research and project studies. And the Illinois experience of Obama, I think, was sort of part of why I was in the vanguard of the left intellectuals activists who were not at all fooled by Obama, who sort of tried to warn the nation about Obama, right? Because basically what Obama would do, he's a smart guy. I mean, Obama's a smart guy. I want to give him credit. I mean, Harvard Law, it's the, likelihood he ran the Harvard Law, he's not going to be a dummy. He was always sort of a policymaker. He sometimes always kind of thought that he maybe actually read the whole study, not just the executive summary. He didn't just have a staffer, break it down for him. Like, give me 3 talking points on this study. He just kind of read it, kind of interested in topics that researchers came up with. And then he would sort of feign a lot of concern about it and be very convincing at it and being very eloquent and silver-tongued in talking about it. And then basically go down to Springfield. And he would sound militant and progressive talking to his district on the south side of Chicago. Then he'd go down to Springfield, where his poker buddies were Republicans, and just kind of wrangle up some kind of very milquetoast, kind of fairly meaningless piece of legislation that was more about symbolism than anything very real. And I know he did that on an Illinois health care bill in the late 90s. I had direct experience of it. I did this I sound like Trump. I did an incredible study. I did a remarkable study of felony record and what it meant for black job prospects in Chicago, Illinois, and the nation. In fact, Michelle Alexander said that the study that we did, that I led, got the funding for and did, inspired her to write the book, The New Jim Crow. And, Obama was to be the keynote speaker at the semi-historic gathering in the south side of Chicago, where this study was released in October of 2002. And again, this dichotomy between words and deeds. Obama, again, eloquent presentation, speaker, showed he understood the issue fairly well, probably had a pretty good sense of what actually needed to be done about it, and then went down to Springfield and worked up some bill with Republicans that he was able to get through. Because, the whole key phrase of Obama was always get things done. Just, get something done. Get a piece of legislation with your name on it. I mean, it was so marginal, the bill that he finally got through in terms of its significance for breaking down barriers for people with felony records to find jobs. I mean, I don't remember the specifics right now, but it was something that might have had a semi-beneficial effect for like 0.01% of people with felony records, And, and so that's the kind of experience you would have with Obama at the state level. And I went and saw the speech that he gave in Daley Plaza in October of 2002. Gee, that was right around the same time. Or 2002, a speech which he later, when the U.S. Senate seat opened up and he realized he could climb into the power elite through the U.S. Senate. And trust me, I know this for a fact, that he was thinking U.S. presidency immediately at the same time that he was thinking U.S. Senate. And the minute John Kerry lost in 2004, I said, Obama, A, is going for the presidency, and B, will get it. I was convinced he would get it very early on. And the speech that he took down from his website right after he became apparent that he had a shot for the U.S. presidency, in Daley Plaza in October of 2002, which really wasn't all that anti-war speech. It really wasn't. It was sort of the Iraq War. He was against the Iraq War not because it would be criminal, that would kill millions of Iraqis, but because it was just dumb. It was dumb. It was a dumb war. And at the same time, he spent a whole bunch of time saying, I'm not anti-war. There are good wars, and supporting the war in Afghanistan, and pretty much embracing imperialism broadly, but rejecting the proposed Bush Iraq invasion is kind of a mistake, the problem. So, I already sort of saw that was a speech, by the way, that was largely sort of encouraged on him to do as part of his fake progressive branding by a number of white ex-New Left activists. No, they weren't even activists anymore. One former New Left activist in the Chicago area, like Bill Ayers, former weatherman, Carl Davidson, the sort of preposterous Marxist for Obama, that sort of was a poisonous factor on the left for many years. Marilyn Katz, former SDSer who was a chief of staff for the second Richard Daley in his mayoralty, and a few others, sort of got into his speech. And, if you paid attention to his words, it wasn't particularly progressive at all. So I sort of knew that, as the phenomenon was going national. And then we moved to Iowa, and I happened to have a front row seat for the 2007-2008 caucus campaign, and just really started paying attention to Obama much more closely. I started reading his speeches and listening to his speeches, and not just the ones he gave to working people or the unions or the campus town peaceniks, but the ones he gave to outfits like the Council on Foreign Relations or the Business Roundtable or the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, or at the opening of the Hamilton Project, which was this neoliberal think tank within the Brookings Institution set up by Robert Rubin of Citigroup and Goldman Sachs. I started really paying attention to all that and contrasting the image of Obama that was being created nationally in Iowa. And the only other place that comes close is New Hampshire. Nobody knows what presidential politics is unless you're in Iowa or New Hampshire. It's just insane because you have all these candidates in this obsession with the presidential campaign a year in advance of the rest of the country. So ample opportunities I had to hear Obama speak around Iowa, to cover him. John Edwards, too, Hillary Clinton, and Bill Richardson, and a few others. And, the contrast between what he said in places like Iowa City to sort of, a starstruck campus town peaceniks, and what he was saying to the real powers that be, the people that he knew. Obama knows everything. Obama has a kind of inverted, vulgar Marxist understanding of power. He knows exactly what's going on, and he loves it. And I know that from Chicago from before, because I worked with someone who was quite close to him and used to share that information with me, that Obama had this kind of cynical, cool, sort of upside-down elitist Marxist understanding of exactly what he was doing. I mean, Obama in his whole presidency is very different from Reagan or from George W. Bush, who were just clowns who were on the surface being manipulated by the masters behind the scenes. Obama is consistently a self-conscious system, state capitalist and imperial manager, right? Particularly an emphasis on the empire. One of the dirty secrets about Obama, and I know this too from Chicago, is that he always understood that the domestic stuff, the race stuff, the pretending to be for health insurance reform, the pretending to be progressive on name your domestic national issue, was all just fluff for the real prize, which was to get into the presidency and play the great chess game of international politics. Obama always understood, because he's not dumb, that insofar, Diana Johnstone talks about it in her book on Hillary Clinton, that the only real place that presidents have real historical agency when they actually make history is in foreign affairs, imperialism, right? And in any event, he's a very smart guy, and he's known what he's been about, and where power is. I think pretty much throughout his presidency, and some of us knew that in Illinois and Chicago from very, very early on. And left liberal authorities on the two coasts just didn't really seem to want to hear about it. It's just Katrina Vanden Heuvel didn't want to deal with it, didn't want to hear about it. They wanted to believe. They just insisted on the notion that they were going to get a new deal out of Barack Obama.
So, what were your impressions, or what are your thoughts about his time in Chicago regarding housing, specifically as a community organizer? Because I know that was a real publicity coup to convince people that the work he was doing on behalf of what Michael Hudson and Robert Fitch called the fire industry, finance, insurance, and real estate, was in some ways at all like the type of organizing you see in the heat of a union strike or organizing against a war or something like that.
Yeah, I really, I'm not all that familiar with that history. He really didn't spend that long as being a community organizer. He ended up being in his resume, he referred to him as a civil rights attorney. I don't know what they're talking about. He never appeared in court on much of anything, and I don't know of any civil rights struggles he ever litigated. I know he sort of did some real estate law for some of the shady characters in Chicago. I'm mindful some of the names now. But the community organizer thing was just sort of, I think, probably part of his profile building. I really do. I think Obama had very grandiose ambitions from quite early on. I think from at least Harvard Law on, if not before. And there's this kind of shady connection with Zbigniew Brzezinski when he was a political science major at Columbia, right, elite Ivy League school, and no one can find his senior thesis paper or something. It disappeared, which my understanding is it was sort of a Brzezinski-esque kind of take on. I'm quite serious that Obama the great game for him was always global. And I think he had this understanding of himself as being someone kind of special who was going to go all the way to the top from early on, but he needed to. He couldn't just say, I'm the anointed one who's the first black guy to head the Harvard Law Review and therefore elect me president. He had to sort of find a political base. He had to create a political base, and I think that's a lot about what the move to Chicago was about, and some of the history in Chicago. I guess he did fantasize about being a community organizer and did it for a little while, but it didn't take him long to get very frustrated with it. And to this kind of a Linsky type of organization he was with, and ends up telling the guy, this is actually how it's done. It really isn't done. This doesn't really get us anywhere. It's going to become more from the top down, so I've got to go to Harvard and get a Harvard law degree. And,
right.
He marries Michelle. That's a lot. I'm not saying he didn't actually love Michelle. I have no idea, right? But that's, he goes and he becomes part of the Trinity Church down in 95th Street in the south side of Chicago, where for years his pastor and his mentor is Jeremiah Wright. This is a big avenue of legitimacy in Black Chicago. He has to prove his chops in Black Chicago, too. The Black Chicago is like, bourgeois Black Chicago is kind of like a small town. And it often doesn't take kindly to outsiders. And Obama had to work that community. He had to, over many years. And, one thing people forget about Obama is he was highly suspect in Black Chicago until the moment of his ascendancy. Until then, black folks in the city of Chicago did not particularly like Barack Obama. He was Harvard. He lived over in a mansion in Hyde Park, Kenwood, over by the University of Chicago. Elite, damn near Ivy League school over there, neoliberal, university. And all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, what's he doing here? He got killed. He went after Bobby Rush for the 2nd Congressional District on the South Side in 2000, and Bobby Rush just murdered him in the Democratic primary for that seat. And he said, he's not really all that black. He's not all that Chicago. And I remember even when I started working in the Urban League, folks didn't particularly take too kindly like Obama. And then he gets picked he gets the nod for that open U.S. Senate seat, and he just, the attitude changes on him quick, fast, and in a hurry.
Okay. I had previously heard, it was actually in a Counterpunch radio interview with Michael Hudson, that the situation was Obama did work in Chicago, and it was on behalf of the Pritzkers, I believe.
That sounds right. Yeah, Penny Pritzker, sure. The hotel heirs, yeah.
Yep, and the Hyatt,
yeah.
He does work on behalf of their property interests, as this community organizer thing is actually just a pretty name for gentrification work.
That could very well be.
And
that could very well be. There's also a lot of weird stuff that goes on with his first job out of Columbia, which was, I'm blanking on the name of the organization right now, but which all indications are that there was some sort of CIA fund type of organization, which is not to go into conspiracy theories that the CIA hatched Barack Obama in a test tube somewhere and unleashed him on humanity, but that he had a kind of creepy foreign policy connection, early on. So there's all these early sort of apprenticeship things going on the steps to the great sellout that is the Obama presidency. No doubt.
So he goes...
an interesting thing happens with his Senate seat, too. A lot of people forget this, but I think it was his second term in the Illinois Senate, and I was wrongly connected to the redistricting map of Illinois in 2000 out of the Urban League, and I didn't have anything to do with it, but another political operative close to Obama worked at the Urban League, which is a 501c3 and is not supposed to be involved in partisan politics at all. But nonetheless, this political operative was working for them. And they redrew the map in Illinois. And the map was redrawn for Obama in such a way that his district not only included the black South Side district, but went up into the North Shore and the Gold Coast, and even further up north, putting him in contact with some of the biggest, richest, and most powerful movers and shakers in Chicago and Illinois politics, like Lester Crown of General Dynamics, and this was a big educational moment for him in terms of finding out which side his bread was buttered on and how politics really work. Because now he's interacting with millionaires and billionaires and stuff like that.
Right, and particularly what happens is Pritzker introduces him to Robert Rubin, the former Clinton Treasury Secretary, who has been the one that the kingmaker, who
the wizard,
is
the godfather of neoliberal economics,
and his disciples, Larry Summers, and that whole crew are the ones that are in the White House in the very first term, and they're acting out.
Hudson had Obama hooking up with Rubin in his Illinois days?
Well, Pritzker introduces him to Rubin.
Well, Rubin would be interested in him once it becomes clear that he's probably going to be a U.S. Senator.
Right.
Yeah. Which is kind of clear by 2002 and 2003. Mm-hmm. Because everybody that might have bested him in the primaries just implodes. And then even the guy that he would have run, he might have had a very strong contender against him on the Republican side. The guy just completely blows up in a divorce scandal, and it ends up just being a walk, you know? I mean, it's clear it's going to be a walk, so I could really see Rubin getting interested in him at that point.
Yep. And Summers and that whole coterie of neoliberal economists have enacted the Rubin agenda that dates back to the Clinton years, with manipulation of the chained CPI, Consumer Price Index, that is in turn used to determine the COLAs on your yearly Social Security, building up to the privatization of Social Security, which previously had been profiled by Robin Blackburn for Counterpunch. Yeah, and they know there's a crisis brewing, and particularly in connection with real estate, and it's going to have to deal with a lot of underwater and exploited minority homeowners. Who better to be the outward public rebranding face of the bailout that's coming than a first black president who knows how to talk and sound like a progressive, but is in fact not so secretly, because all you had to do was read his speeches to power elite bodies, but it was unknown to most of the voters as a deeply committed right-wing neoliberal, right? It's just a perfect mix. Mm-hmm. I think Obama was irresistible to the power elite. I think they knew that both domestically and internationally that the American system simply needed a rebranding, right? After the long George W. Bush nightmare,
after the beginnings of a financial breakdown, which are already pre-sentiments up before the real breakdown comes. I think they know it. And Hillary can't do it. Hillary can't be that rebranding. John Edwards can't be that rebranding because he's just too damn populist. I mean, Edwards just went nuts in Iowa with the two Americas. You know, the rich. I mean, Edwards suffered the 1% versus everybody else. And Edwards denounced. I saw this. People, the leftists don't want to believe me when I say this. Well, what do you mean? You must be crazy. I saw numerous town halls in '07 where Edwards would just blow the roof off of the joint, denouncing, he damn near said ruling class, we need a revolution, and he denounced corporate Democrats as well as corporate Republicans. I mean, it's to the point that Nader endorsed Edwards on Hardball, MSNBC, in like October of 2000. So we're going to go with him. He ruled himself out. And Obama was their man. Obama was the only one who could really do it.
Exactly.
And he was smart, too. You know, and Hillary was smart, but she just doesn't have, and she shouldn't have freaking run this time around, because she just doesn't have that X factor. She's not a candidate. You know, she just isn't. And Obama was. Obama is. And he showed that to the nation and the world in the keynote address in 2004, which is actually, and this is the sign of a great orator. I don't want to call Obama a great orator, but the sign of a great candidate. It's a deeply reactionary speech. I wrote a biting takedown of Obama's 2004 keynote address in Boston. It's the one time I've got an email from Noam Chomsky that didn't follow an email. I sent him, but one time I got an email and say that was really good, you know, and I just. But nobody but us on the left knew it was a reactionary speech, right? It came off as a great American liberal progressive speech, and he really showed that he had that kind of magic, I think, in that particular speech.
Yeah, and I mean,
and it was just irresistible to them. I mean, once you have a Muslim-sounding name, they had so much damage. They had done so much damage in the Middle East with Bush's invasion of Iraq, and he's an empire guy, and he understood the Council of Foreign Relations line perfectly, and yet was capable of advancing it, which is a very imperialist line, while sounding like he was anti-war.
Exactly.
Though qualifying his anti-war statements to show that he was really not anti-war, but the qualifications only understood to people on the left trained to decode the qualifications. Let's put it that way.
Exactly. And
anyway,
what's fascinating is somebody who also called this out was Robert Fitch in his speech to the Harlem Tenants Association. And
you know, there's actually a surprisingly long list of left thinkers who got Obama early on. Adolph Reed is one of them. I mean, Adolph Reed is calling out Obama as a vacuous to repressive neoliberal back in 1996 in the Village Voice. He doesn't actually name Obama, but everyone knows that it was Obama. He was ringing with Glenn Ford and Bruce Dixon at Black Agenda Report. We're calling out Obama as a sort of Democratic Leadership Council, corporate neoliberal type of Democrat from, I believe, late 2002 on. And we're giving him crap about being a sort of Goldman Sachs type of Democrat and for taking down his original anti-Iraq war speech from his website once he was going for the U.S. Senate seat. You mentioned Fitch. Doug Henwood wrote a wonderful piece in early 08 called Would You Like Some Change with that, which showed that he understood. Ken Silverstein wrote a really first-rate piece of journalism about Obama's backers and about the Obama money machine that was being created after he came into the U.S. Senate, a money machine that was clearly about a launch for the presidency in coming years. It's called Obama Incorporated, and he's got some great quotes from Wall Street backers who make it very clear that they understand that Obama's going to be very useful to them, that he's not the left progressive that some people Thank you. I mean, I could go on with a lot of names of folks who got it, but they couldn't seem to break through into the mainstream media or get taken seriously. I guess the left never really does get taken seriously. But it wasn't just left-writers. There was a wonderful piece in May of 2007 by Larissa McFarquhar, who, as far as I could tell, was just sort of a centrist New Yorker writer, maybe vaguely liberal. And it's called The Conciliator, and it just breaks down how deeply, it's her phrase, how deeply conservative, sort of republic, really, in essence, Obama is. So it wasn't just the left.
Right. I mean, Obama's 2008 campaign was really the last one before the explosion of Facebook and the social media platforms. There had been things up until that, but we've now seen the proliferation of social media in an election now twice on the level like 2012 and 2016, and that democratizing of the media has certainly impacted the way those things are being understood. I mean, it's really a matter of stage presence, like you see a stage performer.
Yeah.
And that's what strikes me as what Clinton's failing was ultimately, was she has never been anything more than kind of the background vocalist or, you know, the supporting drumline, rather than being the Springsteen of the Democratic Party.
Well, you know, I think Iowa, the situation, being situated in Iowa was an advantage for kind of being, I in my writing, I seem like I'm believing all the pollsters, and I suppose I did to a large extent. But I start to get an inkling the closer we get to this last election that she's not gonna make it. And one thing is in Iowa, if you're a political journalist and you go to their events, and I was really masochistic in 07 and 08. I went to a whole bunch of them. It was the first time in my life I'd ever lived in a state that actually had a presidential election. I mean, and that's because it was a contested state. I mean, I've been in Illinois and New York all my life, and they're just blue states. I mean, one of the absurdities of our electoral college system is that we only really have a presidential election in a relatively small handful of contested states. So I just got fascinated by what this process was. I wanted to understand it. I wanted to know what these people were doing. I wanted to know what the Iowa caucus was. So I heard a lot of Hillary speeches, and I mean, she's just the most wooden, non-charismatic, horrific candidate you're ever going to see. And I think that's part of why Iowans are probably not all surprised about her failing, because she's been through every county of the state, you know, forever. You know, 07, 08, and then again, a whole bunch in 15 and 16. And I mean, she just couldn't give a rousing, you know, barn-burning campaign speech of her life depended on it.
Right.
And you sort of have to be able to do that.
Right.
You know? Doesn't have that magic.
No.
When you're really a corporate neoliberal party owned by Wall Street pretending to be a party of the people, you better be a pretty damn sophisticated huckster and salesman like Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. And those guys don't come along very often. I mean, and Al Gore didn't have it. Jimmy Carter didn't have it. Michael Dukakis didn't have it. Walter Mondale didn't have it. Hillary Clinton didn't have it.
John Kerry didn't have it.
JFK kind of had it. I was going to say LBJ had it, but LBJ really kind of was. And JFK was kind of a proto-neoliberal. JFK anticipates neoliberalism in a lot of interesting kind of ways. JFK was a real live sort of populist New Dealer, you know, who then is just crucified by his imperialism and Vietnam. So LBJ kind of had it. But then self-destructs with the Vietnam War. And Carter gets in, not because he has any of that particular magic X factor or charisma, but simply because he's the first Democrat to get the nomination after Watergate. He kind of slips in, and then he drops the ball. And the only ones in my lifetime really were Clinton and Obama. And I don't know who they're going to come up with next time. I don't know who that is.
I want to run a quote by you from Fitch's speech to the Harlem Tenants Association that he gave just after the election of '08. He says, in the same way, Obama's notion of change claims to transcend the politics of interest while it steers sharply to the right. What kind of change does America need? Above all, America needs a change of heart. Her people need to give up selfishness. All Americans, rich and poor, white and black, the hod carrier and the hedge fund operator, must give up self-interest. Stop always asking, what's in it for me? In a word, with his emphasis on change coming from people giving up group egoism and together pursuing the common good while practicing old-fashioned virtues, Senator Obama is a communitarian. In the audacity of hope,
Yeah, that's very much like how Adolph Reed described this kind of bootstraps communitarian foundation-hatched Obama in January of 1996. It almost sounds like he's working off of Adolph Reed's original description of him. But yeah, that's sort of the we're all sort of we're post-racial, we're post-class, we're post this,
very individualist.
That. Yeah. We're all just kind of and then you proceed to go in underneath that communitarian veneer and make policy pretty much in accord with the interests of the most selfish, sociopathic, entrenched, parasitic interests on the planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
The financial institutions that push the economy nationally and globally, over the planet, right? Yeah, and it was the famous William Greider line in March of 2009. Obama has continued with Bush the blunt lesson about power, which is that the federal government has all kinds of money for people who are already rich, and almost nothing for everybody else, right? So, where's my bailout, right? And it's just this extraordinary service to the wealthy few who get richer than they ever wildly imagined in the wake of practically destroying the global economy. Thanks in no small part to an Obama policy team that is just riddled with Wall Street insiders and sort of lifelong financial political operatives like Timothy Geithner and Lawrence Summers and all of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that's not truly understood is point out by Hudson in his book. Have you read Killing the Host?
I got through about half of it, and then it was due back at the library, and it was one of, if I'd owned it, it would have been one of the most heavily underlined books of my life, because it's a really deeply brilliant sort of breakdown of finance capitalist takeover of everything.
Right, and he points out very clearly that what happened in '08 was truly a financial coup. And Obama's election is very much framed by the fact that he is able to force through that bailout.
That's not unlike how Mike Lofgren talks about what happened in '08 in his book, The Deep State, The Fall of the Constitution, and the rise of a shadow government. And he sort of analogizes with 9/11 in that there's this use of fear. And I mean, literally, Hank Paulson, goes up and gets down on one knee and begs Nancy Pelosi. And Wall Street basically says there'll be nothing left at all of the economy unless you give us everything we want, right? And unless we get zero interest rates, and unless we get, thoroughly recapitalized. It's just a mythology that there couldn't have been other ways of approaching the financial crisis. There's no reason on God's green earth that these banks couldn't have been essentially nationalized, broken up, and put under the leash of the federal government. But I think a financial coup is a fairly accurate way to put it.
Yes, and
In
particularly
the first, the 95% of the new income in the country in Obama's first term went to the top 1%.
exactly. And particularly what's so important in my mind is the emphasis that in 2008 they were saying if you don't do the bailouts, you can't go to the ATM. But dollar for dollar, the FDIC was ensuring all consumer banking. It was only the gambling money of Wall Street.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And, if you've been watching, as I have, some of the, I had MSNB on and MSNBC on today, but just the same on CNN and elsewhere. It's just this endless kind of praise given to Obama for having saved us from a Great Depression and for having brought about a recovery. But this recovery has felt like a depression for just about everybody I know.
Yeah, I mean Paul Craig Roberts said it's a depression. There's no recovery.
And there was this incredible study, I think, came out of Princeton recently. I think Alan Kruger was one of the authors, and he's a Princeton economist who I think was, for a while, part of the Obama team, right? And he's a fairly rigorous quantitative economist. And 94% of the jobs, about 10 million, there were a bunch of jobs created under Obama. And like 94% of them are like these part-time or temporary, no-benefit, short-term contract gigs, meat jobs, and that's what a lot of people I know are doing. That's just a lot of the employment I've had in recent years. And I'm talking about people with advanced degrees in some cases, not always, highly intelligent, highly skilled people just trying to scrape by any way they can. If you expand the poverty level up to 200% of poverty, which is probably where it ought to be when you get into the real cost of a basic minimum family budget, half the population is poor or near poor, right? There used to be some statistic about half the population being just 1 or 2 months worth of paychecks away from not being able to meet their rent payment or their mortgage payment. An incredible number of people are just barely hanging on, right? Not to mention drowning in debt and all that kind of horrible stuff. So, this recovery that he's getting all the credit for, it's a recovery that's brought us to the point where the top 10th of the top 1%, so I guess that'd be the top 100, right, has, the top 1,000, has as much wealth as about 90% of the country. So, that's a hell of a recovery, right?
Yeah, and in a rather circular way, most of that gig economy is enabled, and the labor mobility that's created stems from the Affordable Care Act and the Medicaid for All system he created.
Oh, yeah.
And the remaining element of his recovery, so-called, is within the medical sector because of the expansion of the patient base.
Okay. Yeah. It's just it really is just sort of mind-boggling, and one of the it's amazing how little reference it ever gets anymore. But one of the things that John Edwards sort of compelled both Obama and Hillary Clinton to include in their campaign rhetoric in 2008 was the Employee Free Choice Act. Edwards used to go around in Iowa and say that the greatest, with some justice, he said the greatest anti-poverty program in American history was the American labor movement. And basically, the Employee Free Choice Act is card check authorization. And basically, card check authorization would amount to the legalization of union organizing in this country. I mean, majorities of American workers forever have told pollsters that they would prefer to be in a union and have a collective bargaining agreement than not. Than not have either opposing. And it's just kind of irrelevant, right? Because people are routinely fired. Organizers are routinely fired. People who show union sentiments are routinely fired. You pass Check or Employee Free Choice Act, and you would fundamentally really throw a monkey wrench into employers' ability to block unions. And Obama campaigned on it again and again and again, went to labor union meetings in 08, 07 and 08, said he was for it, highlighted it, and it just disappeared. It just completely, totally, utterly disappeared. And now private sector unionization is down to, what is it? Is it 5% for the private sector workforce? And overall, something like, 11 or 12% if you include the public sector.
And on top of that, he proliferated charter schools, which are an assault on the most
teachers' unions,
intelligent element in the union movement. Go after the smartest people first.
Yeah, Well, so much for the vanguard now. The NIU movement is focused on the public sector, right? Scott Walker, that whole thing, because they are the more heavily unionized part of the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're serious, if you're even remotely serious about helping people put a floor under wages and improve their standards of living, you would defend their ability to form unions. I remember when Scott Walker abolished, with the help of the Republican Senate in Madison, took away the historic right of collective bargaining for public sector workers in Wisconsin, which I believe was the first state to introduce such a right. And there were 30 days of mass demonstrations with national and even international attention, mass outpourings of labor solidarity, people coming from other parts of the country, including both coasts, to march in solidarity. And I don't think Obama once said even the slightest word of solidarity with the public sector workers up there and the supporters. I think there might have been a tweet from Obama that sounded vaguely friendly towards the Wisconsin rebellion, but only after it had been kind of shut down and turned into a doomed, doomed recall campaign, and a really dysfunctional and stupid effort to run a horrible Democrat against Scott Walker, the horrible Democrat named Tommy Barrett, who wouldn't even identify himself with unions or labor, and who'd already had his butt kicked by Scott Walker just like a year before or so. So, all these liberals like Katrina Vanden Heuvel and John Nichols and the MSNBC crowd, would say, we're going to get Obama in there, and it's going to be like FDR and the labor movement and the working class in the 1930s. We're just going to have to push him and make him do good things. Well, when people rose up and tried to push governments and policymakers to do good things, A, in Wisconsin, he didn't have one word of encouragement for them. And B, when Occupy rose up precisely around economic issues, precisely around Wall Street control, precisely around the hegemony of finance, capital, and economic inequality, kind of like resonating with the old populist movement in the late 19th century, or the workers' rebellion in the 1930s. Not only did Obama not really have words of encouragement, he crushed it. Well, he kind of simultaneously crushed it. The Department of Homeland Security under Obama worked with city governments all over the country. Democratic Party runs city governments to infiltrate, surveil, provoke, antagonize, and ultimately physically dismantle Occupy movements all across the country, while at the same time rhetorically stealing Occupy rhetoric for use against Republicans in the 2012 election.
Exactly. Mitt Romney, the 1%.
I noticed Obama used to say it was hilarious. He didn't want to be too obvious about it. So if you look at a lot of his campaign speeches, he's denouncing the 2%, which I always thought was funny.
Right. Mitt Romney.
2%. Because it would just be too obvious that he was taking the Occupy Wall Street line.
Mm-hmm. So, are there any thoughts in closing you'd like to discuss regarding having seen this as a historian, having seen this as an activist, having
Yeah.
seen this as an American.
Yeah. This is not irrelevant history. This is a recycling that takes place. Sheldon Wolin wrote a wonderful book called Democracy Incorporated, in which he discussed the evolution of the Democratic Party as the inauthentic opposition in the liberal era. It's sort of the fake progressive alternative that doesn't really do anything. The real actual radical party, the only one that's left in the country anymore, is the Republicans. Unfortunately, they're radical, profoundly reactionary, regressive, and repressive kinds of ways. And this history matters because we need to stop recycling it, or we're just going to reproduce. We don't learn from this. We cannot just dig in and just get all psyched up for, I don't know, Cory Booker or Andrew Cuomo or even Kamala Harris or, fill in the blank. Name your next progressive, supposed Democratic hope. We have to get out of that cycle because it's just kind of a vicious circle, and it just reproduces itself. So then if you're lucky, you get a Democrat in there for a while, and maybe they stem a little bit of the damage. They demobilize their base, and every time the right wins, it comes back, and they seem to be worse each time. Right? Bush a little bit worse than Reagan, Trump a little bit worse than Bush, maybe a lot worse than Bush. God knows what the next one will be. So I don't know. We have to. This history matters, so that it's kind of a cliche. Santayana. Those who don't know the mistakes of the past are doomed to repeat them. But I think it applies here. And if we think democracy is about going in a voting booth once every 4 years, making a mark, and then letting other people run everything, then there's no chance. There's no chance for a decent future.
That's all we got for the time for today, folks. Thanks for listening, and tune in next time for another episode of Political Gingervitis. I'm your host, Andrew Stewart, and I want to remind you again, America's greatest social democratic period corresponded with the lives of those wonderful commies, Larry, Curly, and Moe.